The chain snapped tight when Alora Bennett tried to stand. Metal scraped against the iron bed frame, loud enough to echo across the quiet room. The window beside her showed the gray water of Seattle's harbor, fishing boats rocking gently in the early morning fog. It looked peaceful out there. Inside the room, it was anything but. Alora gripped the edge of the mattress, breathing hard. 7 months pregnant, ankles shackled to a steel chain bolted into the floor. And the man who locked it there was her husband. Grant Callahan stood calmly near the door, adjusting the cuff of his tailored suit like he was preparing for another ordinary workday. "You need rest," he said evenly. Alora stared at him, disbelief burning behind tired eyes. "Rest doesn't require chains." Grant didn't answer right away. He simply reached into his pocket and lifted a small key, letting it swing slowly between his fingers. The key to her freedom. And he wasn't giving it back. Outside, gulls cried over the marina. Inside, the air felt too thin to breathe. Alora pressed a trembling hand over her stomach when the baby kicked suddenly. Sharp, urgent, almost frightened. Grant noticed. For a moment, his expression softened, but it wasn't compassion. It was calculation. "Everything will work out," he said quietly. Then he stepped closer and removed something from around her neck. A small, silver medallion she had worn since childhood. Alora grabbed his wrist. "Don't." Grant gently peeled her fingers away. "You don't understand what this is," he murmured, but the way he looked at it said otherwise. Like a man staring at a winning lottery ticket. Before we go further into what happened inside this locked room above the harbor, take a second to like the video, follow the story, and tell me in the comments, what would you do if the one person you trusted most suddenly held the key to your prison? Because for Alora Bennett, this morning was only the beginning. Grant slipped the medallion into his coat pocket. Then he walked to the door. The lock clicked. The chain rattled again as Alora tried once more to stand. "Grant!" she shouted. He paused, only long enough to glance back. "Try to get some sleep," he said, and then he left. Downstairs, the front door closed. A car engine started. Grant Callahan was heading to another meeting with investors. Another day of smiling for cameras and shaking hands with people who believed he was one of Seattle's most generous businessmen. None of them knew his pregnant wife was chained in a bedroom above the harbor. And none of them knew why. Alora slowly sank back onto the bed, staring at the locked door while the sound of Grant's car faded into the distance. Her heart pounded, not just from fear, but from a growing realization. Grant hadn't chained her there because he hated her. He had chained her there because he wanted something. Something connected to that medallion. Something valuable enough to turn a respected man into a jailer. Outside the window, fog rolled across the water. And somewhere in the city below, someone else was already searching for the same secret Grant believed he had finally found. By noon, Grant Callahan was shaking hands beneath crystal chandeliers. The ballroom of the Cascadia Innovation Summit buzzed with cameras, investors, and reporters. Seattle's tech elite moved through the crowd with champagne glasses and polished smiles. On stage, Grant looked exactly like the man the city believed him to be. Confident, brilliant, generous. Grant Callahan is one of the most visionary investors in the Pacific Northwest, the host announced. Applause filled the room. Grant smiled modestly and stepped to the microphone. "Our job," he said smoothly, "is to build systems that make people's lives better." The audience nodded, phones lifted to record him. No one in that room knew that less than 2 miles away, his pregnant wife was chained to a bed. Grant continued his speech with effortless control. Startups trusted him. Universities invited him to speak. Hospitals praised his donations. Over the past decade, he had built a reputation so clean, so polished, that no one questioned him. That reputation was the most valuable thing he owned, and he protected it carefully. After the applause ended, Grant stepped off the stage and was immediately surrounded by investors. "Grant, incredible presentation. Love the new healthcare platform. We should talk about the Series B round." Grant handled each conversation with practiced ease. Calm voice, firm handshake, perfect eye contact. But while he spoke about innovation and impact, his mind was somewhere else entirely. Back in the locked room above the harbor, back with the woman who carried the key to everything he had spent 6 years chasing. Grant slipped away from the crowd and stepped onto a quiet balcony overlooking Elliott Bay. The wind was colder out here. The harbor cranes stood against the gray sky like steel skeletons. He reached into his coat pocket. The silver medallion rested in his palm. The symbol engraved on its surface was simple, an intricate crest shaped like a compass rose. To most people, it meant nothing. But Grant had spent years studying that symbol. 28 years ago, the Harrison Trust, one of the oldest financial dynasties in Chicago, lost their only surviving heir. A child disappeared during a hospital transfer after a fire. The investigation never found a body, but the infant had been wearing a medallion, a family marker, the same crest now resting in Grant Callahan's hand. For decades, the Harrison fortune had remained frozen in legal limbo. Billions locked behind a single condition: the heir must be identified. Grant had discovered the story while researching trust structures for a corporate client. At first, it was just curiosity. Then it became obsession. And then, 3 years ago, something happened that changed everything. He met Alora Bennett. She was working a late shift at a community clinic when Grant first noticed the necklace resting against her collarbone. The symbol had caught his eye instantly. He had spent months confirming what his instincts already suspected. Adoption records, foster care transfers, hospital archives. The trail had been incomplete, scattered across decades, but it led to the same conclusion every time. Alora Bennett wasn't just a nurse from South Seattle. She might be the missing Harrison heir. Grant closed his fist around the medallion, his pulse steady but deliberate. Billions of dollars. Generational wealth, power beyond anything he had ever controlled. But inheritance law was complicated. If Alora reclaimed the Harrison fortune as a married woman, her legal spouse could claim significant financial authority. Grant had studied those statutes carefully. That was why he married her. And that was why she could never leave that house until everything was secured. Behind him, the balcony door opened. Grant? A colleague stepped outside, holding 2 glasses of champagne. There you are. Everyone's looking for you. Grant slipped the medallion back into his pocket and turned with his usual calm smile. Just needed some air. The colleague laughed. You're the most in-demand man at this conference. Grant nodded politely. If they only knew. Downstairs, investors were waiting to discuss millions. Across the city, Alora Bennett was pulling against a steel chain, realizing the man she trusted most had turned her life into a prison. Grant adjusted his cufflinks and walked back toward the ballroom. His plan was almost complete. He just needed one more thing: proof. And once he had it, no one, not even Alora, would be able to stop him. Before Grant Callahan, Alora Bennett's life had been simple, exhausting, and honest. She worked 12-hour shifts at a public health clinic in South Seattle, the kind of place people came to when they had nowhere else to go. No insurance, no family doctor, just a waiting room full of quiet desperation. Alora handled it all: fevers, injuries, frightened mothers, elderly patients who hadn't seen a doctor in years. She moved fast, spoke gently, and stayed long after her shifts ended. Her co-workers used to joke that she cared too much, but caring was the only thing that had ever made sense to her. Alora grew up in foster homes. No family history, no inheritance, no safety net. Just a woman who once raised her long enough to teach her one rule: protect the things that protect you. That woman had given her the silver medallion when Alora was 9. Alora never knew where it came from. She just never took it off. The night she met Grant, the clinic had been understaffed and chaotic. A car accident nearby had sent half a dozen injured patients through the doors at once. Grant arrived with a cut across his forehead and blood on his sleeve. Alora rushed him into an exam room. "You're lucky," she said while cleaning the wound. "Another inch and you'd need stitches." Grant studied her while she worked. Calm hands, steady voice, no hesitation. "You do this every night?" he asked. "Pretty much." "You must see a lot." "Enough." He smiled slightly. "You're very composed." Alora shrugged. "People panic. Someone has to stay calm." Grant said nothing after that. but his eyes drifted to the necklace resting against her collarbone. The medallion. He recognized the symbol instantly. Grant didn't say anything then. Not about the crest. Not about the investigation he had spent years pursuing. Instead, he asked her to dinner. At first, Alora almost said no. She had early shifts, bills to pay, and no patience for men who treated nurses like charity projects. But Grant didn't act like that. He listened. He asked about her work, her patients, her long nights at the clinic. He spoke about investments, technology, the future of healthcare. He donated new equipment to the clinic 2 months later. Her coworkers called him a miracle. Alora called him kind. Grant called it strategy. Their relationship moved quickly after that. Grant seemed thoughtful, attentive, protective. He helped her move into a larger apartment. He insisted she work fewer shifts. "You're burning yourself out," he told her. At the time, Alora believed him. When he proposed a year later, she didn't hesitate. The wedding was small, just a quiet ceremony near the water. Grant's colleagues attended. A few of Alora's co-workers came too. Everyone said the same thing afterward. She was lucky. Lucky to marry a man so successful. Lucky to marry a man so generous. Lucky to marry a man who clearly adored her. The first 6 months felt normal. Then, things began to shift. Small things at first. Grant suggested she quit the clinic entirely. "You shouldn't be around sick patients while pregnant," he said. He offered to handle all their finances. "Let me take care of things." He installed security cameras around the house for safety. He began working from home more often, watching, noticing where she went, who she spoke to. When Alora questioned him, he always had the same calm explanation. "I'm just protecting you." But protection slowly turned into control. Phone calls went unanswered because Grant screened them. Friends stopped visiting after Grant told them Alora needed quiet rest. Even the mail started arriving through him first. By the time Alora realized how isolated she had become, she was already 6 months pregnant and living in a house where every door felt heavier than the last. The night everything finally changed began quietly. Grant came home later than usual. His expression was different, focused, almost electric. He placed something on the kitchen table, a thin envelope. "Good news," he said. Alora frowned. "What kind of good news?" Grant opened the envelope slowly. Inside were several printed documents, DNA analysis reports. Alora's name appeared on the top page. She looked up, confused. "Grant, what is this?" For a long moment, Grant didn't answer. Then he reached forward and gently lifted the silver medallion from around her neck. "This," he said quietly, "is the reason our lives are about to change." The way he said it made something cold settle in Alora's chest. Not excitement, not relief, something closer to dread. And she had no idea that within hours, the man she married would lock the bedroom door and turn her life into a prison. Grant didn't raise his voice. That was the first thing Alora noticed. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He simply held the silver medallion in his hand and studied it like a scientist examining proof. "You've been wearing this your whole life," he said quietly. Alora stood across the kitchen table, her arms wrapped protectively around her stomach. "Yes." "Do you know what it is?" "My foster mother gave it to me." Grant nodded slowly, like a teacher waiting for a student to understand something obvious. "That's not what I asked." Alora frowned. "It's a necklace." Grant smiled faintly. "No," he said. "It's a key." The word landed hard. Alora's stomach tightened. "A key to what?" Grant slid the DNA report across the table. "Your past." She didn't touch it. Grant leaned back in his chair, calm and composed. The same posture he used when negotiating million-dollar investments. 28 years ago, he said, a hospital in Chicago caught fire. Alora said nothing. Grant continued. A newborn infant disappeared during the evacuation, the only surviving child of the Harrison family. The name meant nothing to her. Grant watched her reaction carefully. The Harrisons built one of the oldest private trusts in America. Banking, railroads, oil. Generations of wealth. He tapped the medallion with his finger. Their family crest is engraved on this. Alora shook her head slowly. That's impossible. Grant pushed the report closer. It's not impossible. It's confirmed. The paper trembled slightly as she picked it up. Lines of medical data, genetic markers, a legal certification at the bottom. The conclusion was clear. Biological lineage, Harrison Family Trust. Alora's heart began pounding. That can't be right, she whispered. Grant stood and walked slowly around the table. But it is. His voice carried something new now. Excitement. Obsession. Do you know what the Harrison estate is worth? He asked. Alora didn't answer. $2 billion. The number filled the room like thunder. Alora stared at him. You ran a DNA test on me? Grant shrugged lightly. You shed hair. You leave fingerprints. Biology is surprisingly cooperative. You did this without telling me. Grant's smile faded slightly. I needed certainty. Alora pushed the papers away. I don't care about some rich family in Chicago. Grant's eyes hardened. That's because you don't understand what this means. Alora stepped back. It means nothing if it's not my life. Grant's patience thinned. No, he said sharply. It means everything. He held up the medallion again. This symbol froze a $2 billion trust for 28 years. Lawyers, investigators, private security firms, all searching for the same thing. He stepped closer. You. Alora felt the air leave her lungs. You're wrong. Grant's voice dropped to a whisper. I've spent 3 years proving I'm not. The room went silent. Outside, wind pushed rain against the windows. Alora looked at the man she married and suddenly saw someone different. Not the thoughtful investor, not the supportive husband, a strategist, someone who had been planning something long before she understood the game. Grant, she said slowly, why are you telling me this? Grant tilted his head. Because timing matters. Alora felt dread rising again. What timing? Grant glanced toward the staircase, then back at her. You're pregnant. The words were calm but deliberate. Inheritance law changes once a legal heir has a child, especially if she's married. Alora's chest tightened. You're talking about money like it already belongs to you. Grant didn't deny it. Instead, he walked to the front door and turned the deadbolt. The heavy lock clicked. Alora's pulse spiked. Grant? He walked back toward her slowly. The world is going to come looking for you eventually, he said. Lawyers, investigators, maybe even the Harrison family themselves. His eyes settled on her stomach. But until certain documents are signed, we can't allow complications. Alora's voice dropped. What are you saying? Grant didn't answer directly. Instead, he gently took the medallion from the table and slipped it into his pocket. Then he took her wrist. His grip was firm, controlled, and he started guiding her upstairs. By the time Alora realized what was happening, the bedroom door had already closed behind them, and the sound of metal locking into place echoed through the room. The first night in the locked room, Alora didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the steel chain around her ankle, trying to convince herself this wasn't real. Grant had locked the bedroom door. He had bolted the chain into the bed frame himself, and he had taken the medallion. At midnight, she heard him moving downstairs. Quiet footsteps, a glass placed on the kitchen counter, the low hum of a phone call. His voice carried through the floorboards. Calm, controlled. The verification will take a few weeks, he said. No, she hasn't contacted anyone. Alora's stomach tightened. He was already talking to lawyers, or investors, or someone worse. The baby shifted suddenly inside her, a hard kick against her ribs. She placed both hands over her stomach, breathing slowly. You're okay, she whispered. We're getting out of here. The chain rattled when she stood. It was longer than she expected, about 6 feet. Enough to reach the bathroom and the small window near the bed. Not enough to reach the door. Grant had calculated the distance perfectly. Alora knelt beside the metal cuff around her ankle and examined the lock. Standard hardware, simple, cheap, not impossible. She scanned the room, bed frame, lamp, a dresser. Her eyes landed on the bathroom door. Inside, the mirror above the sink had cracked months ago when Grant slammed it during an argument. A thin shard still sat behind the faucet. Alora pulled the chain tight and stepped into the bathroom. Her ankle burned as the metal dug into her skin. She ignored it. The shard of mirror was barely 3 inches long, but one edge was sharp enough to cut. Alora slid it carefully into the lock. The metal scraped. She twisted. Nothing. Her hands shook. Another twist. Still nothing. Downstairs, a chair scraped across the floor. Grant was moving again. Alora froze. Footsteps across the kitchen. Then silence. Her pulse hammered. She tried again, pushing the shard deeper into the lock. The mechanism shifted slightly. A faint click. Hope surged through her chest. She twisted harder. The shard snapped. The broken piece fell into the sink. Alora stared at it, breathing fast. Footsteps began climbing the stairs. Slow, measured. Grant was coming up. Alora barely made it back to the bed before the bedroom door opened. Grant stepped inside, holding a tablet and a glass of water. His eyes moved instantly to the bathroom, then to the broken mirror shard in the sink, then to the chain stretched tighter than before. He didn't shout. That made it worse. Grant set the glass on the nightstand and walked slowly toward her. "Trying something new?" he asked quietly. Alora said nothing. Grant crouched beside the chain and lifted the cuff around her ankle. The skin beneath it was red and swollen. "You're going to hurt yourself," he said. Alora finally spoke. "You're insane." Grant didn't react. He stood and walked back toward the door. Alora's voice sharpened. "You can't keep me here. People will notice." Grant turned slightly. "Who?" The question hung in the room. Alora's mind raced. Co-workers, neighbors, friends. But Grant had already cut those connections away. Grant walked into the bathroom and removed the broken shard from the sink. Then he returned to the bed. Without warning, he shortened the chain. Another metal lock snapped into place. Now she could barely reach the bathroom door. Alora's chest tightened. "You didn't have to do that." Grant met her eyes calmly. "You didn't have to try escaping." He picked up the glass of water and handed it to her. For a moment, it almost looked like concern, but his next words erased the illusion. "You need to conserve your strength," he said. "Stress isn't good for the baby." Alora pushed the glass away. "You don't care about the baby." Grant's expression didn't change. "You're wrong." His gaze dropped briefly to her stomach. "I care very much." He walked toward the door again. This time he paused before leaving. "Oh," he added casually, "I'm installing cameras tomorrow." Alora felt cold. "Why?" Grant smiled faintly. "So we can avoid misunderstandings." The bedroom door closed again. The lock clicked. The sound echoed louder than before. Alora stared at the chain around her ankle, realizing something worse than the failure of her escape attempt. Grant wasn't panicking. He wasn't afraid she might get away. He had expected her to try, and he had already prepared the next move. 300 miles away, the Harrison Trust investigation had nearly gone cold. For 28 years, private investigators, attorneys, and genealogists had searched for a child who might not even be alive anymore. Every lead ended the same way: missing records, dead witnesses, sealed hospital files. But Damien Rhodes didn't believe in dead leads. He sat in a quiet office in downtown Chicago, surrounded by stacks of case folders and digital archives. Unlike the investigators before him, Damien didn't start with old evidence. He started with the present. People left traces everywhere now: photos, charity events, public appearances. And powerful families like the Harrisons had left behind one thing investigators loved: symbols. Damien leaned closer to the screen as a database of public event photos scrolled past. Galas, fundraisers, charity auctions. Then he stopped. One image caught his attention. A technology fundraiser in Seattle. 3 months ago, a smiling couple stood near the center of the frame. The man was easy to identify: Grant Callahan, venture capitalist, rising star in the Pacific Northwest investment scene. Damien had heard the name before, but it wasn't the man that froze his attention. It was the woman standing beside him, a black woman with calm eyes and a quiet smile. And around her neck, a silver medallion. Damien zoomed in slowly. The image blurred slightly as the resolution stretched, but the symbol became clear enough: a compass-shaped crest, the Harrison family mark. Damien sat back in his chair. "That's impossible," he muttered. The missing Harrison child had vanished 28 years ago during a hospital evacuation. The only confirmed detail investigators ever recovered was the medallion the infant had been wearing. It was a family identifier, unique, never reproduced. and the woman in the photo was wearing it openly at a public event. Damien leaned forward again and pulled up the metadata. Name tag visible in another photograph. Alora Bennett. His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. Search results appeared. Community health nurse, Seattle resident, married, spouse, Grant Callahan. Damien frowned. The Harrison Trust had spent decades searching orphan records, adoption systems, hospital archives. No one had ever looked for the heir married to a venture capitalist. He opened another file and pulled up the original hospital photograph from the fire investigation. The image showed a nurse holding a newborn child wrapped in a blanket. Around the infant's neck, a tiny silver medallion. Damien enlarged the symbol. Then he placed the two images side by side. The match was undeniable. Same crest, same design. The room went quiet. Damien exhaled slowly. Either that's the biggest coincidence in American history, he said to himself, or someone already found her. He opened a secure call line and dialed the Harrison Trust legal office. The attorney answered after 2 rings. Rhodes, I need you to pull every file we have on Grant Callahan. A pause. Why? Damien turned back to the screen. Because the missing Harrison heir might be alive. The attorney's voice sharpened instantly. That's not something we speculate about. I'm not speculating. Damien rotated the monitor camera so the attorney could see the photograph. The medallion filled the frame. The line went silent for 3 seconds. Then the attorney spoke quietly. Where is she? Seattle. And the man beside her? Damien glanced at Grant's smiling face in the photo. Her husband. The silence returned. Longer this time. Finally, the attorney said, if this is real, that inheritance is still locked behind identity confirmation. Damien nodded. I know. Then the husband becomes legally relevant. Exactly. The attorney's voice dropped. If the heir is married when the trust is activated, her spouse gains financial influence. Damien finished the sentence for him. Another pause. Then the attorney said something that made Damien's chest tighten. Find out if she knows who she is. Damien stared at the image of Alora Bennett again. Something about her expression in the photo bothered him. She didn't look like a woman hiding a fortune. She looked like someone who had no idea what she was standing next to. Damien closed the laptop slowly. Yeah, he said under his breath. That's exactly what I'm about to find out. The first sign something was wrong came just after midnight. Alora woke suddenly, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach. For weeks, the baby had been active at night. Small kicks, slow turns, steady reminders that she wasn't alone in that locked room. Tonight, there was nothing. She waited. Another minute passed, then 2, still nothing. A tight knot formed in her chest. Hey, she whispered softly, pressing both hands against her stomach. Come on. Silence. The chain around her ankle clinked as she shifted on the bed, trying to stay calm. Stress wasn't good for the baby. Every prenatal nurse she'd ever worked with had repeated that rule. But Alora knew bodies, and she knew when something wasn't right. 10 minutes passed. No movement. Her breathing grew shallow. She slid off the bed and paced the limited stretch of floor the shortened chain allowed. 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. Okay, she muttered. Okay, you're fine. Just resting. Another 10 minutes passed. Still nothing. Panic began creeping into her voice. Grant! She shouted toward the door. No response. She shouted again, louder this time. Grant! Footsteps echoed upstairs. The door unlocked. Grant stepped inside wearing a calm expression that didn't match the urgency in her voice. What's wrong? The baby isn't moving, Alora said quickly. Something's wrong. Grant glanced briefly at her stomach, then back at her face. How long? 20 minutes. Maybe longer. Grant walked slowly into the room, studying her like he was evaluating a business proposal. Alora's patience snapped. Call a doctor. Grant didn't reach for his phone. Babies pause movement sometimes. I know that, she snapped. I'm a nurse. Grant's expression remained steady. Then you also know panic doesn't help. Another minute passed. Alora grabbed the edge of the bed to steady herself. Grant, she said, voice shaking now. Please call someone. Grant leaned against the dresser. Let's wait a little longer. Alora stared at him. You're serious? Grant shrugged slightly. You're under a lot of stress. Alora's fear turned into anger. You locked me in a room with a chain on my leg. Grant didn't deny it. He simply folded his arms. And yet, you're still alive. The words hit like ice. Another minute passed. Still, nothing from the baby. Alora felt tears sting her eyes. Grant, please. Grant finally stepped closer, placing one hand lightly on her stomach. For a moment, he stood there, quiet. Then he removed his hand. I don't feel anything unusual. That's because you don't know what you're feeling for. Grant sighed softly. You're letting fear control the situation. Alora's voice rose. My baby might be dying. Grant's eyes hardened. Our baby, he corrected, but there was no warmth in the words, only calculation. Alora suddenly understood something. The baby mattered to him, just not the way it mattered to her. Grant walked back toward the door. Try to get some rest. Alora's jaw dropped. You're not calling anyone? Grant paused. No. The answer was flat, final. Why? She demanded. Grant turned slowly. Because complications right now would create unnecessary legal problems. Alora froze. Legal what? Grant met her eyes calmly. If the baby is born prematurely, the documentation timeline changes. Alora's stomach dropped. You're thinking about paperwork? I'm thinking about the future. Alora took a step toward him, the chain snapping tight. My child could be in danger. Grant's voice lowered. And the Harrison Trust is worth $2 billion. The room went silent. Grant looked at her stomach again. That child represents legal leverage. The words felt unreal, cold, clinical. Alora felt something inside her shift. Not fear, not desperation, something sharper. Grant opened the door. Try to sleep, he repeated. The lock clicked again as he left. Alora stood in the center of the room, shaking. Her hands slowly returned to her stomach. And then, a small movement, weak, but real. Relief flooded her chest so quickly she almost collapsed. You're okay, she whispered. Another tiny kick answered her. Alora closed her eyes. Grant thought he had control. Grant thought the chain made her powerless. But as she stood there in the quiet room above the harbor, Alora Bennett understood something he hadn't expected. The man she married didn't care if she survived. He only cared about what she was worth. And once that truth settled into her mind, something inside her stopped begging and started thinking. Grant installed the cameras the next morning. Alora heard the drilling before she saw them. Short bursts of metal biting into drywall. Footsteps moving around the bedroom ceiling. By the time he finished, 2 black lenses stared down from opposite corners of the room. Grant stepped back and checked the view on a tablet. Just making sure everything's secure, he said calmly. Alora sat on the edge of the bed, the chain tight against her ankle. She didn't look at the cameras. She looked at him. You're turning this place into a cage. Grant didn't argue. It already is, he replied. He placed the tablet on the dresser and adjusted the angle of one camera slightly. There are blind spots in every room, he added. Now there aren't. Alora said nothing. Grant studied her for a moment, as if expecting another attempt to escape. When she didn't move, he nodded once. Good. He picked up his coat and walked toward the door. I'll be back late tonight. Investors in town. The lock clicked again after he left. Alora waited. 1 minute. 5. 10. The house fell quiet. Only the distant sound of harbor traffic drifted through the window. Alora slowly lifted her eyes to the cameras. Grant had said there were no blind spots, but Grant also believed she had stopped trying. That assumption was his mistake. She stood carefully, testing the chain's length again. The metal cuff still limited her to a small circle of space around the bed. Bathroom, nightstand, half the dresser, nothing else. But the dresser itself had a vent behind it, an old wall register barely visible above the floorboards. Alora noticed it weeks ago when she cleaned the room, back when she was still allowed to move freely, back when she still believed this house was hers. She pulled the chain tight and crouched beside the vent. The screws were old, loose. Her fingers worked them slowly, turning each one by hand. One dropped softly onto the carpet, then another. The vent cover lifted away. Inside was darkness and dust. Alora reached inside, carefully. At first, she felt nothing. Then her fingers brushed something small and rectangular. Her pulse spiked. She pulled it out. A phone. Old. Scratched. Probably forgotten years ago when Grant remodeled the house. The screen was cracked, but intact. Alora pressed the power button. Nothing. She held it again, longer this time. The screen flickered. A faint battery symbol appeared. 1%. Alora felt adrenaline surge through her chest. She looked up at the cameras instinctively. Grant's tablet probably monitored them remotely, which meant every movement mattered. Alora turned her back to the nearest camera and lowered the brightness of the phone screen. No passcode. Just an old home screen with outdated apps. The signal bar flickered weakly, but it existed. Her hands trembled as she opened the messaging app. Who do you contact when the world thinks your husband is a respected billionaire investor? Police? Friends? Co-workers? Grant had already erased those connections. Time was disappearing. The battery indicator blinked again. 0% warning. Alora typed quickly. Help. Locked in house. Callahan Marina property. Pregnant. She hesitated for half a second, then sent the message to the first emergency contact number she could find. 911. The message sent. For 1 second, the screen stayed bright. Then it went black. Dead. Alora exhaled slowly, staring at the dark screen. Somewhere in the city, that message now existed. Whether anyone believed it, that was another question. She returned the phone to the vent and replaced the cover. The screws twisted back into place. From the camera's perspective, she had barely moved. Alora climbed back onto the bed just as a distant sound reached the house. An engine pulling into the driveway. Her heart jumped. Grant wasn't supposed to be back for hours. The front door opened downstairs. Footsteps crossed the hardwood floor, then stopped. Silence. Alora held her breath. A moment later, the stairs creaked. Slow, deliberate. Grant was coming up. The bedroom lock turned. The door opened. Grant stepped inside and closed it behind him. His expression looked normal, but his eyes were searching the room carefully. Alora stayed still on the bed. Grant walked slowly toward the dresser. He picked up the tablet and glanced at the camera feed. Everything appeared calm, exactly how he expected. Grant looked back at her. You've been quiet today. Alora forced her voice steady. I'm tired. Grant studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Good. But as he turned to leave the room again, his eyes briefly moved toward the vent behind the dresser. Just for a second, long enough for Alora to realize something terrifying. Grant Callahan didn't just control the house. He understood it. And if he discovered that phone before anyone responded to her message, the locked room above the harbor might become a place no one ever found. Damien Rhodes didn't wait for permission. The moment the emergency dispatch log appeared in his secure search feed, he knew something had changed. The message was short, fragmented. Help. Locked in house. Callahan Marina property. Pregnant. The location tag matched a waterfront property outside Seattle. Owned by Grant Callahan. Damien stared at the screen for several seconds. It could be a prank, a misdirected message, or someone desperate enough to send a cry for help from a dying phone battery. But the name in the property record changed everything. Grant Callahan, the same man standing beside the woman wearing the Harrison medallion. Damien leaned back slowly. If the woman in the photograph was the missing heir, and she was now sending distress messages from her husband's house, this wasn't coincidence. This was containment. Damien grabbed his jacket. Within 20 minutes, he was driving south from the airport. Seattle rain streaking across the windshield. The harbor cranes appeared through the gray fog like giant shadows. His GPS pointed toward a quiet stretch of waterfront properties. Expensive homes, private docks, the kind of place where neighbors minded their own business. Perfect for someone who didn't want attention. Damien parked 2 blocks away. The Callahan property sat at the end of the Marina Road. 3 stories, glass windows facing the water, security gate closed. Lights glowed inside. But the house felt strangely still. Damien stepped out of the car and studied the property. Security cameras covered the front entrance. 2 more along the sidewall. Grant Callahan invested in surveillance. That meant the inside might be worse. Damien walked slowly along the sidewalk, pretending to check his phone while studying the upper windows. Then he saw movement. Third floor. A shadow crossed the glass. A woman's shape. Slow. Restricted. Then it disappeared again. Damien's jaw tightened. He took a step back toward his car. If a pregnant woman really was being held inside that house, charging through the front gate alone would only make things worse. He pulled out his phone and dialed the Harrison trust attorney. The call connected instantly. "You found her?" the lawyer asked. Damien kept his voice low. "I'm outside the husband's house." A pause. "And?" Damien watched the third-floor window. "I think she's being held." The silence on the line grew heavy. "Define held." "I saw a woman upstairs. Limited movement." "You're speculating." "Then explain the distress message sent from inside the property." Another pause. The lawyer exhaled slowly. "If that woman truly is the Harrison heir, this situation becomes extremely sensitive." Damien nodded. "Sensitive isn't the word I'd use." "What are you suggesting?" Damien's voice hardened. "I'm suggesting your missing heiress may be locked in a room while her husband waits to claim $2 billion. The attorney didn't respond immediately. Finally, he spoke again. "You need proof." "I'm working on it." "And roads." Damien waited. "If the husband realizes what she is before we confirm her identity legally, he gains leverage." Damien looked back at the house. Too late for that. Inside the third-floor room, a light switched off. The window darkened. Damien's instincts screamed. He ended the call and slipped the phone into his pocket. Then he started walking toward the marina. The docks extended behind the houses, hidden from the street. If he could reach the waterline, he might see the rear of the property without triggering the security cameras. The wooden boards creaked beneath his boots as he moved quietly along the dock. Wind pushed the smell of salt and engine fuel across the harbor. Finally, the Callahan property came into view. The back of the house rose above the marina like a quiet fortress. Large glass windows, private balcony, and one narrow window on the third floor. Damien stepped closer. From this angle, he could see the inside of the room. A bed, a lamp, and a metal chain attached to the frame. Damien's chest tightened. A woman sat on the edge of the mattress, one ankle shackled, her hands resting over a pregnant stomach. She looked toward the window suddenly. For a split second, their eyes met across the dark harbor air. Then the bedroom door behind her opened. A man stepped into the room. Grant Callahan. Damien froze. Grant moved calmly across the room and spoke to the woman. Damien couldn't hear the words through the glass, but he could read the power dynamic instantly. Grant stood tall, relaxed. The woman sat still, restricted. Then Grant glanced toward the window. Damien ducked behind the dock railing. A moment later, the room light turned off completely. The house went quiet again. Damien stayed crouched in the darkness, his pulse steady but sharp. He had seen enough. The missing Harrison heir wasn't just alive, she was imprisoned, and the man holding her captive had no idea someone had finally arrived at the harbor to see the truth. Grant Callahan didn't trust assumptions. That was the rule that built his career. Investors lost fortunes by believing things they couldn't prove. Grant believed only in documents, numbers, and verified facts, which was why he ran the test twice. The private genetics lab sat in a quiet office building in Bellevue, far enough from Seattle to avoid attention. Grant waited alone in the consultation room while the technician finalized the report. His fingers tapped slowly against the table. Across from him, the sealed envelope sat untouched. The second DNA analysis. The first one had already suggested the truth, but Grant didn't build plans on suggestions. The door opened. A middle-aged technician stepped inside carrying a tablet. "Mr. Callahan," she said cautiously, "we've completed the verification." Grant leaned back in his chair. "And?" The technician hesitated. "You requested a direct comparison to the Harrison Trust genetic archive." "Yes." She placed the tablet on the table and turned it toward him. The report was simple, clear, final. Genetic match. 99.98%. Subject confirmed as direct biological descendant of the Harrison family line. Grant stared at the screen. For a moment, he didn't speak. Years of investigation, quiet research, careful planning. Every suspicion he'd carried since the night he saw that medallion in the clinic had just become fact. Alora Bennett wasn't just connected to the Harrison fortune. She was the Harrison fortune. Grant exhaled slowly. How long before the trust lawyers begin verification? He asked. The technician shifted uncomfortably. That depends on when the family is notified. Grant nodded. Good. He closed the tablet. That won't happen yet. The technician frowned slightly. Sir, Grant stood and slid the envelope containing the printed report into his briefcase. Thank you for your discretion. When he stepped outside the building, the cold air hit his face sharply. Grant walked to his car, his mind already calculating the next steps. $2 billion locked behind legal conditions. Identity confirmation. Inheritance transfer. Marital influence. He had studied the Harrison trust structure carefully. If Alora reclaimed the fortune while legally married, her spouse gained substantial authority over financial management, especially if a child was involved. Grant started the engine. The baby changed everything. If the child was born while they were still married, the trust structure became even more complicated. More leverage, more control. He drove back toward the harbor house, the gray Seattle skyline rising through the rain. For the first time since this plan began, Grant allowed himself a small smile. Everything was aligning. But when he turned onto the Marina Road, something unusual caught his attention. A car he didn't recognize was parked 2 houses down. Dark sedan. Engine cold. Someone had been watching the waterfront. Grant slowed slightly as he passed it. No one inside. He continued driving, but the image stayed in his mind. Grant didn't believe in coincidences. When he reached the house, he parked slowly and stepped out. The harbor wind cut through his coat as he walked toward the door. Inside, the house was silent. Exactly how he expected. Grant walked upstairs. The bedroom door opened. Alora sat on the bed, the chain still locked around her ankle. Her eyes moved toward him carefully. Grant studied her for a long moment. Then he placed the briefcase on the dresser and removed the envelope. Good news, he said calmly. Alora didn't respond. Grant opened the envelope and placed the DNA report on the bed beside her. You're officially the missing Harrison heir. Alora stared at the paper without touching it. Her voice was quiet. I told you I don't care. Grant chuckled softly. That's the difference between us. He leaned closer. I care enough for both of us. Alora looked up. You locked me in a room. Grant's smile faded slightly. I protected an investment. The words hung between them. Alora felt anger rising again. I'm not your investment. Grant tapped the report with his finger. No, he said calmly. You're my access. Outside the window, a boat engine passed across the harbor. Grant picked up the report and slid it back into the envelope. Soon lawyers will start asking questions, he continued, which means we need to finalize a few things before that happens. Alora's stomach tightened. What things? Grant met her eyes. Documents. What documents? Grant's voice stayed perfectly calm. The ones that ensure the Harrison fortune stays exactly where it belongs. Alora understood immediately. With you. Grant didn't deny it. Instead, he glanced briefly toward her stomach. The baby makes everything easier. The cold calculation in his voice was unmistakable. Alora's pulse began to race again. Grant turned toward the door. We still have time before anyone starts looking for you, he said. But as he left the room, Grant's mind returned to the unfamiliar car parked down the street. For the first time since the DNA confirmation, a new thought entered his calculations. Someone else might already be looking. Damien Rhodes had seen enough cases to know one thing. Systems didn't break all at once. They cracked in small places first. A missing record, a skipped appointment, a message that shouldn't exist. That message was what brought him to Seattle. But it wasn't enough to force police action. Not yet. So Damien went looking for the crack. He sat inside his rental car 2 blocks from the marina, laptop open, running quiet searches through medical and insurance databases. Alora Bennett was 7 months pregnant, which meant something simple. Prenatal care, routine checkups, blood work, ultrasounds. Every pregnancy left a trail. Damien typed her name again. The results appeared instantly. 3 scheduled prenatal appointments in the past 6 weeks, all canceled. No rescheduling, no follow-up visits. Damien frowned. Doctors didn't let pregnant patients disappear like that. He opened the clinic file. The provider was a small healthcare center in South Seattle, the same clinic where Alora had worked before quitting her job. Damien grabbed his phone and dialed the clinic. A tired receptionist answered. Rainier Community Health. Damien spoke calmly. I'm reviewing patient records for a family legal matter. I need to confirm something about Alora Bennett. There was a pause. Oh, Alora, the woman said. You know her? Of course, she used to work here. Did she attend her prenatal appointments recently? Another pause. Actually, no. Damien leaned forward slightly. Did anyone explain why? The receptionist hesitated. Her husband called. What did he say? He told the doctor she was on strict bed rest and couldn't leave the house. Damien's eyes narrowed. Did the doctor verify that? No, we just assumed they transferred her care to a private physician. Damien ended the call and stared at the screen. Grant had cut off the medical trail, which meant one thing: control. But Damien needed something stronger than suspicion. He opened a second window on the laptop and searched the city's emergency dispatch logs again. The message Alora sent had been logged as a possible false alert. No police had been dispatched, but the entry still existed. A digital breadcrumb inside the system. Damien copied the report and forwarded it to someone he trusted. Detective Laura Mendoza, Seattle Police Department. They had worked together years ago on a fraud investigation that turned violent. If anyone could push the system forward, it was her. 10 minutes later, Damien's phone rang. You better have something real, Mendoza said without greeting. Damien kept his voice steady. I'm looking at a possible unlawful confinement. Based on what? Distress message from inside the property. That's thin. I know. What else? Damien turned the laptop toward the marina house, visible through his windshield. I also have a pregnant woman who hasn't attended medical care in 6 weeks. That still doesn't give us probable cause. Damien's voice hardened. I saw her chained to a bed. Silence filled the line. Finally, Mendoza spoke again. You're serious? Yes. Did you photograph it? No clear angle. That's a problem. Damien leaned back in his seat. Then let's talk about the husband. What about him? Grant Callahan. Another pause. Venture capitalist? The same. Mendoza sighed. Rich men with lawyers are the hardest targets. Damien nodded slowly. I know. So unless you can prove she's being held against her will, Damien interrupted. She sent a message asking for help. That could still be misinterpreted. Damien looked back at the harbor house. Lights glowed faintly behind the third-floor window. Laura, he said quietly, if we wait until we have perfect evidence, that woman might not survive the pregnancy. The words hung in the air. Mendoza exhaled slowly. Send me everything you have. Damien forwarded the files. Dispatch report. Medical appointment records. Property information. 30 seconds passed. Then Mendoza spoke again. It's not enough for a warrant. Damien expected that answer. But it is enough, she continued, for a welfare check. Damien's pulse sharpened. When? I'll get a patrol unit near the marina tonight. Damien glanced at the harbor house again. The third-floor light had turned off. Do it fast, he said. Why? Because the man inside that house just confirmed something today. What? Damien watched the quiet windows. He finally knows what she's worth. And once Grant Callahan understood the full value of the woman he had imprisoned, Damien knew something dangerous would follow. Men who chased billions didn't panic. They eliminated risks. Grant came upstairs before sunrise. Alora knew because the house didn't creak when he was calm. His steps were measured, quiet, controlled, like he didn't want the walls to overhear him. The lock turned. The door opened. Grant walked in carrying a leather folder, a pen, and a small portable printer. He set everything on the dresser as if he were preparing for a normal meeting. Alora sat upright on the bed, chain tight around her ankle, eyes locked on the folder. What is that? She asked. Grant didn't answer right away. He pulled out a single page and held it up. Power of attorney, he said calmly. Alora's throat tightened. No. Grant placed the paper on the bed beside her. The text was dense, formal, filled with legal language designed to confuse and trap. You'll sign, he said. Alora laughed once, short and sharp, more disbelief than humor. You think you can chain me up and then ask for a signature like I'm signing a birthday card? Grant's expression didn't change. I'm not asking. Alora's voice rose. Then what is this? Extortion? Grant turned slightly, checking the camera feed on his tablet like he wanted a record of this moment. This is insurance, he replied, for our family. Our family? Alora snapped. You mean your wallet? Grant leaned closer, voice low. You want to talk about family? That baby is family. He pointed toward her stomach. And that, Alora swallowed hard. Not with you. Grant's mouth tightened. He pulled out a second document. This one transfers financial authority to a marital trust I control. Alora stared at it, then looked up slowly. You already planned this. Grant didn't deny it. He simply laid out the papers in a neat row, like contracts on a conference table. I planned everything, he said softly. Alora's hands clenched. Why? Because you're greedy? Grant's eyes flashed. Because I'm smart, he corrected. Because I saw what you were before you saw it yourself. Alora's voice shook with rage. I was a person. Grant's tone stayed clinical. You were a missing asset. The words hit her harder than a slap. Alora's chest rose and fell fast. She tried to stand, but the chain snapped tight and yanked her back onto the mattress. Grant watched without moving. No sympathy, no flinch, just patience. You're going to sign, he repeated. Today. Alora stared at the pen like it was a weapon. If I don't. Grant's gaze slid toward the nightstand. A small orange bottle sat beside the lamp. Prenatal vitamins. And another bottle she hadn't seen before. Grant picked it up and turned it in his fingers. Your doctor prescribed a mild sedative for anxiety, he said. Perfectly safe in small doses. Alora's blood went cold. I don't have a doctor. Grant smiled faintly. Not anymore. He set the bottle down. You're exhausted. You're stressed. You've been emotional. His voice stayed smooth. It would be easy to tell anyone you had a breakdown. Alora's hands trembled. You would drug me. Grant leaned in close. I would manage you. Alora's eyes burned with tears, but she forced them back. She could not cry in front of him. Not now. You're not going to get away with this, she said. Grant straightened, looking almost amused. Who's going to stop me? Your coworkers you haven't spoken to in months? Your friends you stopped seeing? The police who won't enter a private residence without proof. Alora's jaw tightened. You're not invincible. Grant tapped the paper again. Sign. Alora shook her head. No. Grant's calm finally cracked. He grabbed her wrist and forced the pen into her hand. Alora jerked away, chain rattling violently. Don't touch me. Grant shoved her back against the pillows, leaning over her. His face was inches from hers now. The charming investor mask was gone. In its place was something harder. Hungry. Do you know what you are? He hissed. You're a door, and I have the key. Alora glared up at him. I'm not your door. Grant's grip tightened. You're going to sign so I can protect what's ours. Alora breathed through the pain in her wrist, then spoke slowly, carefully. Say it. Grant frowned. Say what? Say the truth. Her voice was steady now. You're doing this because you want the Harrison money. Grant's eyes locked on hers. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then he smiled. A cold, honest smile. Yes, he said. I want it. Alora's stomach turned. Grant released her wrist and stood. You have two choices, he said, voice returning to calm. You sign willingly, or you sign after you can't fight anymore. Before Alora could respond, a sound cut through the house. A car door closing outside. Another. Then footsteps on gravel near the marina gate. Grant froze. Not in fear, in calculation. He walked to the window and peered through the blinds. Below, two uniformed officers stood at the front gate, speaking into a radio. A welfare check. Grant's face didn't change, but his eyes hardened. He turned back to Alora slowly, pen still in his hand. Looks like we're out of time, he said quietly. And Alora realized the next few minutes would decide whether she left this room alive or disappeared forever behind Grant Callahan's perfect smile. The knock at the front door echoed through the house. Firm, official. Grant didn't move for 3 seconds. Alora watched him from the bed, her wrist still aching where he had grabbed her. The chain lay tight against the frame, the documents scattered across the mattress between them. Another knock. Seattle Police Department, a voice called from outside. Welfare check. Grant exhaled slowly. When he turned back toward Alora, the rage from moments earlier had vanished. His expression was calm again, polished. The version of Grant Callahan the world trusted. Not a word, he said quietly. Alora didn't answer. Grant collected the papers from the bed and slid them into the folder. The pen disappeared into his pocket. The bottle of pills vanished into the drawer. The entire room transformed in seconds. He glanced at the chain. For the first time since locking it there, Grant hesitated. If the officers came upstairs and saw it, the explanation would collapse instantly. Grant walked to the bed and unlocked the cuff around Alora's ankle. The metal snapped open. Freedom. But his hand stayed on her arm. Listen carefully, he said under his breath. You tell them you're tired. You're on bed rest. You needed privacy. Alora felt blood rushing through her legs as circulation returned. And if I don't? She asked. Grant's fingers tightened slightly. You will. Another knock shook the door downstairs. Sir, we need you to open the door. Grant released her and stepped back. Remember, he said softly, everything you have disappears if this turns into a scandal. Then he left the room. Alora sat frozen for 1 second. Then she stood. The chain clattered to the floor. Her legs nearly buckled after weeks of restricted movement, but she forced herself upright. Downstairs, the front door opened. Grant's voice floated up through the stairwell. Officers, what seems to be the problem? A deeper voice answered. We received a message requesting assistance from this address. Grant chuckled lightly. That must be a misunderstanding. Footsteps shifted inside the hallway. Is your wife home, Mr. Callahan? Of course. Alora moved toward the bedroom door. Her heart pounded so loudly, she thought the officers might hear it upstairs. Grant spoke again. She's pregnant and resting. Doctor's orders. Another pause. We'd still like to speak with her. Silence stretched. Alora knew exactly what Grant was doing, calculating. If he refused, the officers would grow suspicious. If he allowed them upstairs, the risk exploded. Alora stepped into the hallway before he could decide. Her voice carried down the staircase. I'm right here. 3 heads turned toward her. 2 police officers. And Grant. For the first time since she met him, Grant Callahan looked surprised. Just for a second, Alora walked slowly down the stairs, gripping the railing to steady herself. Officer Ramirez stepped forward. Ma'am, are you Alora Bennett? Yes. Did you send a message asking for help? Grant's voice cut in immediately. She must have been confused. Pregnancy hormones can... I did. The room froze. Grant turned toward her slowly. The look in his eyes was a warning. Alora ignored it. Officer Ramirez frowned. Can you explain what's going on here? Alora looked straight at the officer. My husband locked me in an upstairs bedroom. Grant laughed. A sharp, controlled sound. Officer, my wife is exhausted. She's been under medical supervision for weeks. There's a chain attached to the bed. The words landed like a hammer. Officer Ramirez's expression changed instantly. Mr. Callahan, he said slowly, we're going to need to see that room. Grant's smile tightened. You're misunderstanding the situation. Then showing us the room shouldn't be a problem. Grant didn't move. The second officer stepped slightly closer. Sir. For the first time, the power in the room shifted. Grant realized it too. He turned toward the staircase. Fine, he said. They walked upstairs together. Alora followed behind them, her legs trembling but steady. The bedroom door opened. The officers stepped inside. Their eyes moved immediately to the bed. The chain, the metal cuff, the cameras mounted in the corners of the ceiling. Officer Ramirez spoke first. Mr. Callahan. Grant opened his mouth. But this time there was no explanation that could fix what they were looking at. The officer turned toward Alora. Ma'am, are you able to leave this house willingly? Alora met his eyes. Yes. Officer Ramirez nodded once. Then he turned back toward Grant. Sir, step away from the door. Grant didn't argue. He didn't shout. He simply looked at Alora. And in that quiet moment, the man who had controlled everything realized something irreversible. The door he locked had finally opened, and the world was about to walk in. Grant Callahan was released on bail 6 hours later. Money moved quickly for men like him. Lawyers arrived before sunrise. Statements were drafted. Public relations teams began writing explanations before the police paperwork was even finished. By morning, Grant was already standing in front of his waterfront house again, but this time, he wasn't alone. News vans lined the Marina Road. Cameras pointed toward the gate. Someone had leaked the story. Grant Callahan, did you imprison your wife? Mr. Callahan, is it true a pregnant woman was found chained in your home? Do you have a statement? Flashbulbs exploded in his face as he stepped from the car. Grant paused just long enough to give the cameras his practiced expression. The calm, composed smile investors trusted. My attorneys will address the situation, he said evenly. My wife is experiencing a difficult pregnancy, and there has been a misunderstanding. He walked inside without answering another question. But the story was already moving faster than his damage control. By noon, the first article appeared online. Tech investor under investigation after pregnant wife found restrained in home. Within an hour, the headline changed. Venture capitalist accused of imprisoning heiress worth billions. Grant saw that one from his office. He froze. Heiress? He muttered. His attorney looked up from the laptop. You didn't mention that detail. Grant's jaw tightened. That detail wasn't public. The attorney turned the screen toward him. A photograph filled the page. Alora standing outside the police station, wrapped in a blanket, speaking quietly to a detective. Around her neck, the silver medallion. Grant felt the room tilt slightly. How did they? Someone connected the symbol, the attorney said. The Harrison Trust crest. Grant slammed his hand against the desk. That investigation was sealed. Not anymore. The attorney scrolled further. More articles appeared. Missing Harrison heir found in Seattle. Billion-dollar trust dispute looms. Callahan investments under scrutiny. Grant's phone began vibrating non-stop. Investors, partners, board members. The first message came from a venture fund in San Francisco. Until this matter is resolved, we are suspending all joint projects. Another followed. Our firm cannot remain associated with the Callahan Group at this time. Grant stared at the screen as another message arrived. Then another, and another. His empire wasn't collapsing slowly. It was unraveling in real time. Across the city, the reaction spread even faster. Employees at his investment firm walked out of meetings. Corporate partners issued statements distancing themselves from him. A hospital he had donated millions to removed his name from their foundation website within hours. Grant had spent 10 years building his reputation. Seattle was dismantling it in a single afternoon. By evening, the district attorney announced a formal investigation. Unlawful confinement, coercion, potential financial fraud connected to the Harrison estate. Grant sat alone in his office when the final blow arrived. A message from the Harrison Trust legal team. We have initiated legal protection of Miss Bennett and her assets. Any attempt to influence or control her financial interests will be considered criminal interference. Grant leaned back slowly. The room felt smaller now. For the first time since the night he noticed the medallion in the clinic, the outcome he had planned for years was slipping away. Across town, Alora sat inside a quiet hospital room while doctors checked the baby's heartbeat. Steady, strong. Detective Mendoza stood near the window, reviewing the growing stack of reports. You're safe now, she said. Alora nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on the television mounted on the wall. Grant's face appeared on the screen again. A press conference replay. The anchor spoke calmly. Authorities are now investigating venture capitalist Grant Callahan, following allegations that he held his pregnant wife against her will in order to gain control of a multi-billion-dollar inheritance. The camera showed the medallion again, then Alora, then the harbor house. The entire city was watching. Grant had believed he controlled everything. The house, the chain, the money. But Seattle had turned against him faster than he ever predicted. And for the first time since the locked room above the harbor, the balance of power had completely shifted. Grant Callahan was no longer the man controlling the story. He had become the story. 3 months later, the courtroom was silent. Grant Callahan sat at the defense table in a dark suit that looked as perfect as ever. But the man inside it was different now. The calm confidence was gone. The cameras outside, the investors who once waited for his calls, the reputation he built for a decade, all of it had collapsed. Across the room, Alora Bennett stood beside the prosecutor. She looked stronger than the woman who had once sat chained to a bed above the harbor. Her posture was steady, her voice clear. One hand rested gently on the newborn sleeping in a carrier beside her chair. A daughter. Healthy, alive. The judge reviewed the final evidence, the photographs of the chain, the security footage, the messages, the forced legal documents Grant had prepared. Grant's attorney tried one last argument. Mr. Callahan believed he was protecting his family and their future. The prosecutor didn't hesitate. Protecting it from who? She asked. The woman he imprisoned? The courtroom fell quiet again. Grant finally spoke. For the first time during the trial, he looked directly at Alora. You wouldn't have had any of this without me, he said quietly. You didn't even know who you were. Alora met his eyes. That's true, she said. The room leaned forward. I didn't know who I was, she continued, but I know exactly who I am now. Grant had no answer to that. The judge delivered the verdict minutes later. Guilty. Unlawful confinement, coercion, financial manipulation. Grant Callahan was taken into custody without another word. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited again. Cameras flashed as Alora stepped into the sunlight with her daughter in her arms. Someone shouted the question everyone was thinking. Ms. Bennett, what will you do with the Harrison fortune? Alora paused. For a moment, she looked toward the skyline of Seattle, the city that had once watched her disappear into a locked room. Then she answered, I'm going back to work. The reporters blinked. At the clinic where I used to be a nurse, she explained, people there still need help. The Harrison Trust later confirmed her identity and released the inheritance. But Alora didn't buy mansions. She rebuilt the clinic, expanded it, opened new programs for families who couldn't afford health care. The same kind of families she once came from. Months later, the marina house above the harbor stood empty. The chain was gone. The cameras removed. Only the water remained, moving quietly under the gray Seattle sky. The place where someone once tried to trap her future had become just another building on the shore. Because Alora Bennett had already chosen something stronger than revenge. She chose the life she wanted to build. And if this story reminded you that strength sometimes begins in the darkest places, share it with someone who might need that reminder too.